Unit 4, Part 5, Introduction to Meiosis. Once again, today we're discussing content from pages 200 to 205 in the Biology in Focus textbook. So let's begin with some terminology that keeps coming up in this unit. It's important to have a good handle on what these terms mean. So the first term is diploid. Diploid cells are cells that each have two sets of chromosomes. As you know, anytime you see the prefix di, di, it refers to the number 2. In this case, we're talking about cells that have two sets of chromosomes. Every somatic cell in the human body has two sets of 23 chromosomes. So somatic cells are diploid cells, and what we mean by somatic cell is just regular body cells, the non-reproductive cells. So that's most of your cells, right? That's skin, muscle, blood cells, lung cells, liver cells, kidney cells. Those are somatic cells, and they are diploid. They have two sets of chromosomes each. And for humans, there are 23 chromosomes in a set. In other words, you inherited 23 chromosomes from your father in the sperm cell, and another set of 23 chromosomes you inherited from your mom in the egg. This means that the diploid number for our species is 46. And it's important to note here that this number, the diploid number for our species, that number varies quite a bit from one species to the next. The diploid number for chimpanzees, for example, is 48. The diploid number for dogs is 78. And your Thanksgiving turkey has a diploid number of 80. That means every cell in the turkey, every body cell, somatic cell within that turkey has 80 chromosomes. And that means that turkey sperm has 40 chromosomes and turkey eggs have 40 chromosomes, and therefore all turkey somatic cells have 80 chromosomes. Now, recently you've learned a great deal about mitosis, mitotic cell division. And we know that in mitosis, the end result is always two daughter cells, and they are genetically identical. So when a cell divides by mitosis, both daughter cells receive one copy of every single chromosome. So the number of chromosomes does not change. The two daughter cells each have the same number of chromosomes as the original cell. And this is just a very simplistic diagram, kind of poorly drawn by me, because notice my daughter cells appear to be larger than the original cell. That's a horrible drawing, so that just reflects my lack of artistic ability. But the point being made here is that in mitosis, if I start with a diploid cell, let's say this is a skin cell, and human skin cells are diploid, they have 46 chromosomes, that's 23 from the sperm, 23 from the egg. Well, when prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase occurs, and then, of course, cytokinesis, and this cell splits, notice both daughter cells end up with 46 chromosomes each. These are going to be genetically identical daughter cells with the same number of chromosomes as the original cell. And one of my main points today that I'm trying to get across to you is that even though meiosis, we're going to be talking about meiosis a lot soon, meiosis is very similar to mitosis. A lot of the same stages and events occur in meiosis, meiotic cell division, very similar to what happens in mitosis, mitotic cell division. But there are some really important fundamental differences. And the biggest, most obvious difference is the final result. Notice mitosis always produces two daughter cells. They're always genetically identical, and they always have the same number of chromosomes as the original cell. And I want you to notice in a few minutes how different the end result of meiosis is. Okay, so meiosis, and that, by the way, that's how you pronounce that. It looks like it would be meiosis, but it's actually pronounced meiosis, is a special type of cell division that begins the same way as mitosis typically begins. We're still starting with one diploid cell. Both processes start out the same. But meiosis produces not two daughter cells, but four. Meiosis produces always haploid cells. Even though it starts with a diploid cell, the daughter cells are going to be haploid. And you say, what the heck does that mean? Well, it tells you right here. A haploid cell is a cell that only has one set of chromosomes. So for humans, that would be 23 chromosomes in a haploid cell. We know there's 46 in a human diploid cell. So again, meiosis produces four daughter cells, not two. Meiosis produces haploid cells rather than diploid. And perhaps most important, the daughter cells that result from meiosis are not genetically identical. They do not have exactly the same DNA. They are genetically unique. And you'll see why that's so important. So we said before that diploid cells have two sets of chromosomes each, but a haploid cell has only one set of chromosomes. The haploid cells produced by meiosis have one purpose, and that is reproduction. Meiosis always produces reproductive cells. Remember, as we've discussed many times before, mitosis, mitotic cell division, is used for many different purposes. We use mitosis when we grow. We use mitosis to replace the cells that are constantly dying, just maintenance of the body. We use mitosis to create more cells whenever we are healing from an injury. So mitosis occurs throughout the body and serves lots of functions. But meiosis is much more specialized. It only produces reproductive cells. And here's where you start to see some differences between the animal life cycle, which we discussed in the previous lesson, and the plant life cycle. Exactly what those reproductive cells are is a little bit different. So in plants and also in fungus, the reproductive cells that are made by meiosis are not sperm and egg. They are spores. In animals, the reproductive cells that are made by meiosis are indeed gametes, sperm cells and egg cells. Now, if you're wondering what is the difference between a spore and a gamete, they're both reproductive haploid cells. But the difference is a spore is a single cell that can divide by mitosis to grow into an adult on its own. It does not have to fuse with another spore. Whereas a gamete, a sperm or an egg, they have to fuse with another gamete. A sperm by itself can't grow into, well, usually, there are exceptions. There are cases where eggs, unfertilized eggs, do sometimes produce adults, but that only happens in a few situations. It happens in honeybees, It's a process called parthenogenesis, and that's a whole nother lesson. So I won't go down that rabbit hole. But usually, an egg by itself cannot develop into an adult. A sperm by itself cannot develop into an offspring either. But spores can. Spores are single reproductive cells that are ready to start dividing and growing. So that's the difference. In animals, meiosis only takes place in the gonads, which are the testes and ovaries. Nowhere else in your body does meiosis occur. Of course, mitosis occurs throughout your body. Anytime you're growing, healing, replacing cells, that's mitosis. But the only time and the only place you use meiosis is when you're making sperm or eggs in the testes or ovaries. Okay, so earlier I drew out a very, very simplistic diagram of how mitosis works. And I did a little bit better job this time, not much better, but I want to contrast what we looked at before with how meiosis works. Now I want you to notice, if you look right here at this cell, the process of meiosis begins exactly the way mitosis normally begins, with a single diploid cell. So this cell would either be called a primary, well, in animals, this cell would be called either a primary spermatocyte, that is, cell that will give rise to sperm, or in women it would be called a primary oocyte. That sounds like a made-up word, but it's the real thing. That's a cell that gives rise to ova, or eggs. But anyway, it's a diploid cell. So this would be a cell either in an ovary or one of the testes. And it is diploid. It has two sets of 23 chromosomes. By the way, when you see 2N, that's just a shortcut way of writing two sets of chromosomes. N refers to one set of chromosomes. I have no idea why they chose the letter N, but anyway, two sets of chromosomes, two sets of 23 equals 46. So in meiosis, this cell is going to undergo prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis, and it's going to divide, and it's going to make two cells. But right here is where you notice a big difference between meiosis and mitosis. Because these two daughter cells, instead of each one getting 46 chromosomes, they each get one set of 23. Meiosis is sometimes referred to as reduction division, because when the cell divides, the number of chromosomes is reduced. We go from 46 chromosomes in this cell down to only 23 chromosomes in these cells. So that's the extra credit phrase that pays this week. Meiosis is reduction division. Meiosis is reduction division. Now, the other big difference between mitosis and meiosis is when we get to this point in meiosis, we're only halfway through. Each of these two cells is going to divide again. So you actually have another round of prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase in both cells at the same time. We have what's called prophase 2, metaphase 2, anaphase 2, telophase 2. Everything happens twice in meiosis. And so this cell divides to make two cells, and this cell divides to make two cells. And notice this time the number of chromosomes does not change. That reduction division only occurs in the first half of meiosis. So we end up with 4 cells, each of which has one set of chromosomes. So these are 4 haploid cells. And every single one of them are genetically unique. Even these two do not have exactly the same genes. And none of these, in fact, all 4 of them have different genes than each other. And they all four are genetically different from the original cell. Now, explaining how that works is kind of complicated. We'll get to it in a later lesson. But the point is, the final result of meiosis is four genetically unique haploid cells. In this case, they're all going to be potentially gametes, sperm cells or egg cells, because we're talking about animals here. But remember, plants also do meiosis. And in a plant, these would be spores rather than sperm or egg. But still, they would be genetically unique haploid reproductive cells. Again, meiosis always produces four genetically unique haploid reproductive cells. Let's take a little bit of a closer look now at how meiosis is used by animals to make sperm cells and egg cells. And I'm going to use humans as my example, just because I happen to be one. And there's some fairly intimidating terminology that pops up in here, but I think once we go through it, you'll see that it makes sense and it's really not as bad as it looks. So in animals, and I'm using, again, humans as my example here, but in the entire animal kingdom, meiosis is cell division that's used to make gametes. So sometimes another word for meiosis in animals is gametogenesis, which just means creation of gametes, creation of sperm and egg. And of course, it happens both in male and females. And the process is somewhat similar. It's kind of surprisingly similar. The process of making eggs has a lot of similarities with the process of making sperm. In either case, whether we're talking about a cell in the testes or a cell in an ovary, either way, you start out with a single diploid cell. Now, I'm using humans as my example, but there was no way I was going to try to draw 46 chromosomes. So notice I'm only showing 4 chromosomes in my picture here, but rest assured there would be a set of 23 and another set of 23. There'd be 46 chromosomes total. This cell is called a primary spermatocyte. That's what this cell would be called in the testes. The process in men is called spermatogenesis, creation of sperm. In women, the process is called oogenesis, double O on the front, oogenesis, kind of a strange term. And this same cell in the ovary would be called a primary oocyte. Okay, so this is the cell that's going to begin the process of meiosis. Now, a little interesting fact about this, a little bit of trivia here. Women are born with a set number of primary oocytes in the ovaries. And starting at puberty, typically one primary oocyte per month will divide and produce an egg. But there's a set number of primary oocytes in each ovary. And throughout a woman's life, starting at puberty and continuing until middle age, one cell per month will divide until both ovaries run out, literally run out of primary oocytes. And that, of course, is when menopause would begin. It's a little different in men. In men, the primary spermatocytes are continually made. The process of just regular mitosis continues to make more and more and more primary spermatocytes. And starting at puberty, these primary spermatocytes can divide to make sperm. And so, but men typically don't run out of primary spermatocytes. So that's why occasionally you'll hear of some dirty old man who's 80 some years old, and you marry some young woman. Usually she's after his money, and a man sometimes at age 85 can become a father. How is that possible? It's because men continue to make primary spermatocytes throughout life. So a little interesting side note there. Okay, so this cell, whether it's a primary spermatocyte or a primary oocyte, this cell is going to do prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1, and cytokinesis. And it will split into 2 cells. Notice the number of chromosomes is reduced by half. Remember, we call this reduction division. So we now have 2 haploid cells. What are they called? In men, both of these would be called secondary spermatocytes. In women, these 2 cells would be called secondary oocytes. Either way, they are haploid cells. Each cell has half as many chromosomes as the original cell. And something, I don't want to go too deep into this right now, but I just want to kind of plant this seed in your brain. There's a very important thing that happens early in meiosis called crossing over. And what that means is your homologous pairs of chromosomes, like these 2 chromosomes, that's a homologous pair. These 2, that's another homologous pair. They actually shuffle genes back and forth. They literally exchange pieces of DNA with one another. The genes switch places between the chromosomes. So I just made up some genes, big A, big B, little a, little b. Maybe this is the gene for tall, this is the gene for short. I'm just making this up. Maybe this is brown eyes, maybe this is blue eyes. The point is, once we get to the halfway point of meiosis, notice we've got some brand new combinations. We've got tall brown eyes on this chromatid, but on this chromatid here, we've got tall blue eyes. And over here, we've got short blue eyes, but we've also now got short brown eyes. So we've mixed up the combinations of genes by shuffling maternal and paternal genes. That is, if you think about what you're doing here, you're literally taking genes you got from your dad, genes that you inherited from your mom, and before you pass them down to your kids, you are shuffling mom's and dad's genes together. And so the DNA that you're going to pass down to your kids in your eggs or sperm is going to be a mixture of the DNA you inherited from your parents. It's pretty cool. And this is why no 2 sperm cells are ever alike. No 2 egg cells are ever exactly alike. This is why you don't look exactly like your siblings. Even though you might have had the same mom and dad, each sperm and each egg is a different combination of genes. Okay, so back to the story here. Let's say we're talking about women. Let's say we're talking about the process of oogenesis in the ovary. These 2 cells are called secondary oocytes. And they both now will divide. So this cell divides to make 2 cells. This cell divides to make 2 cells. And so notice we end up with 4 cells. There are exceptions to this. Sometimes you only end up with 3 cells in women for reasons that I won't go into now, but at least potentially there's 4 cells, but only 3 of them survive. I beg your pardon. Only 1 of them survives. 3 of them do not survive, and the ones that do not survive are called polar bodies. The one that does survive is the ovum, the actual functional egg that is ready to be released from the ovary and travel down the fallopian tube to the uterus, and maybe it gets fertilized by a sperm, maybe not. But that's the result of meiosis in women, is 1 egg and potentially 3 polar bodies which do not survive, and they're just not needed. Notice the number of chromosomes did not change. If you compare this picture to this picture, the number of chromosomes did not change. You can see 2 chromosomes in this picture. And you can still see 2 chromosomes in this picture. But something changed. Of course, what changed is the number of chromatids in the cell. Did change. So there's that confusing terminology. But we end up with a cell that has half as many chromosomes as the original cell, and that is the ovum or the egg. Now, back to the male side of things. Remember, the same process happens in men. The primary spermatocyte divides to make two secondary spermatocytes. And then those two secondary spermatocytes divide again. So in men, we're going to end up with 4 cells. But in men, all 4 of these cells typically survive. They're called spermatids. And then eventually, when the flagellum develops and it's actually ready to swim and find an egg, then we call them sperm cells at that point. But typically, all 4 cells survive and become sperm, but each one of these sperm has half as many chromosomes as the original cell, and they are all genetically unique. So each one of these sperm cells has a slightly different combination of genes. Okay, so I believe that's a good place for us to stop for now. Remember to email me with the extra credit phrase that pays that I mentioned a little while ago, and I hope you have a great day.